So I want to pull up a picture on the big screen, and this is a picture actually from about a year ago when this is what my son, my eldest son, Indigo, looks like normally when he was at preschool. This is about a year ago. And last summer, as many of you know, I was on sabbatical. I want you to have this picture in mind of what he looks like when he's normally, happy boy. But last summer while I was on sabbatical, I was taking a nap in the afternoon, and I was horrified to discover that I had overslept my alarm. I had set an alarm on my phone, and I totally overslept it. I missed multiple phone calls from his preschool trying to notify me that school had ended over an hour ago. And in fact, our eldest daughter, Emily, had to wake me up in order for me to go and pick up Indy an hour late. So when I arrived, I found him sitting quietly in a chair with his teacher. His face was downcast. I'm pretty sure I saw little tears in the corners of his eyes as the last child left behind. And then he did this thing, which I was dreading the most. He looked up at me with those little puppy dog eyes. Papa, you forgot about me. My gut and my heart clenched simultaneously as I kind of welled up. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I was overwhelmed with guilt in failing this heartbroken little boy. And as I prayed this morning, I wonder if you have ever felt that way in your relationship with God. That when we fail Him in some way, we make a mistake or a misstep, that there is this tendency for us to react in one of two ways. Either we are racked and overwhelmed with guilt, or we want to kind of avoid the problem and start feeling ourselves distancing from God. And I wonder, how can we recover from the guilt, the grip of guilt and discouragement that comes with failure? And this morning we're going to look at another man in the Bible who is very familiar with the discouragement of failure. So if you have a Bible, you want to turn in it to Exodus chapter 33. In Exodus chapter 33, let me give you a little bit of the background. What's happening here is, many of you know, the people of Israel were delivered out of sin and slavery and death in Egypt to life and freedom going towards the promised land. And they got to experience the very presence and power of God in their midst along the way. Now there's one problem. In about chapter 32, right before the passage we're about to read, there was the greatest moment of failure and disappointment for them and for Moses as their leader. You see, while Moses was away up on this mountain for an extended time up on Mount Sinai with the Lord, the people kind of waiting around, and it wasn't just a short period of time, a couple weeks, maybe even a month, they started to grow anxious and afraid. And so they returned back to their Egyptian ways, copying the ways of the Egyptian people by turning to a substitute false god for comfort and for guidance. They made an idol, a golden calf. Bless you. And there was a heavy price for their sin and rebellion and rejection of God. So you can imagine Moses' gnawing guilt. How could this happen? The buck stops with me as the leader. Is this somehow partly my fault? How are we going to go on? And so the big question that he and we need to answer this morning is, how do you recover from real failures in life when we feel like we've disappointed God? Exodus 33, verse 11. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from that tent. Excuse me. Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, 'Bring up this people,' but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, 'I know you by name,' and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you, in order to find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people." And he, God, said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And he, Moses, said to him, God, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, this very thing that you have spoken, I will do. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. I want you to notice the key question that's repeated over and over in this passage. 5 times it said, if Moses has found favor in God's sight. 4 times Moses asks that question. And the 5th time, God responds to it. In fact, we start off seeing that Moses' reaction to his own failure and the failure of his people as their leader in verse 13 is, if I have found your favor in your sight, then show me your ways so that I can get your favor, in order to get your favor. In other words, God, please tell me, what can I do to make it up to you? How can I earn your approval back? Just tell me what to do. Now, in the Old Testament Hebrew language, the word favor, it means acceptance. It's to look at someone with positive regard and accept them. And so to paint you a picture, back in April of 2006, I felt prompted by Jesus to go on a personal short-term mission, to live with homeless people for a couple of weeks. And the first night, as I was laying in the sleeping bag on a sidewalk in the city of Berkeley, it started to rain. And I thought to myself, I have made a terrible mistake. But during that time, I started making friendships with various street people, and there was one evening I got into this very deep conversation with a young man who had schizophrenia. And he was sharing with me how hard it was for him to forgive his parents who passed on this genetic curse to him. How he had never felt acceptance from other people because of his mental health issues. And so I started sharing with him the story of God's story of forgiveness, of acceptance through Jesus. And he actually asked if we could pray, and he wanted to receive Jesus for himself. But I knew, watching his face, it wasn't until the moment that I gave him a big hug that he really got it. Because he whispered into my ear, you know, no one even spoke to me today, much less touched me. And I'm really sorry about the stench. And I told him, first of all, I've been wearing the same clothes for 8 days straight too, so I'm not smelling too fresh. But secondly, when you come to Jesus, yes, indeed, he does accept you. And now that you're part of the family, so do I. And so what Moses is really asking God is, despite the stench of my failure, do you accept me? Do I still have your favor? Will you embrace me? And the final time this key phrase occurs in verse 17, God gently affirms to him, yes, it's true. I continue to find favor with you. In other words, I don't look at you with disgust and disappointment, but with my favor. I still really accept you. I'm still really for you. And it's not something you notice here that Moses earned because of his good thoughts and his good behavior. It's not because of what he has done, but because of who God is. That this is a gift from a holy God to sinful and selfish people because of his relationship with them. And because of that relationship, he pours out his unearned favor, loving kindness, mercy, and faithfulness. So in the Old Testament, what we call favor, in the New Testament, we call that grace. And so the big idea for this whole passage this morning is that, like Moses, we discover that because of our relationship with God, that he continues to give us grace, pour out his grace on us in the midst of our failures. That he shows us unearned, undeserved acceptance. Now the question is, how does that lift us out of our sense of failure and discouragement, knowing that we're recipients of grace? And there's 2 specific expressions of grace from God that he gives to Moses and to us for our encouragement. Verse 11, we discovered that God would speak with Moses not in a formal distance between a master and a servant, but face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. And so you can picture their friendship. There's a sense of kindness, closeness, intimacy. But now, under Moses' watch as a leader, the people have turned away from God. And when you're entrusted by your friend with immense responsibility, and you feel like you've let them down, it's pretty hard not to question, where do you stand with that person? So in verse 12, Moses starts off a conversation reminding God, you said that you know me by name and that I have your favor. Now, can you almost hear the question mark in his voice? If you know my name, do you still know my name? Bless you. Now, when Moses says this, it's not because God is forgetful. He called Moses by name out of a burning bush in the desert. He called Moses by name to help him, to speak prophetically, to work miraculously, to meet with him personally together. So what does Moses mean if God knows his name? And why does that matter? Some of you know, before I became a pastor, I worked on a marriage and family therapy degree at Western Seminary. And as I was finishing up that degree, I met with my academic advisor several times for guidance. But this lovely woman and very wise woman kept getting my name wrong. It was good meeting with you, Jason. I'm like, I wrote down my name right here on the paper that you're holding. In fact, the very final time that we met together, she said to me, sorry, what was your name again? I felt unknown, unseen, unimportant. But in contrast, when I walk into the Starbucks on Mission and A Street, every morning I step up to the counter, and it doesn't matter which barista is there, but they'll always look me in the eye. Good morning, Josh. We've rung up your usual. How's your wife? How's your kids? Has the new baby come? How's the baby sleeping? As they look me in the eye and know my name, they make me feel known, seen, valued for who I am. Moses knows that God has not forgotten who he is. He knows that God knows his name. But what he's really asking is, are we still familiar with each other? Do you see me and know me and still welcome me and accept me and remain close to me, even in my disappointment? You know what that feels like? You ever feel distant from God when you screw up? I was selfish again. I lied again. I lost my temper again. I gave in to pornography or peer pressure. I exalt my work or my play or even my problems over Jesus. I can't remember the last time I prayed. God, if you really knew me, if you really see me, would you turn away from me? Have you forgotten about me? Has he abandoned me? I probably deserve it. But here's the good news. God responds in verse 17, I know you by name. I know who you are. I know what you've done. And you continue to have favor, my acceptance in my sight. In other words, I, God, look at you, Moses, and I really see you, and I know you. I know your failures, and I continue to embrace you and accept you as my friend. I haven't forgotten about you. I haven't abandoned you. I'm still close to you. I still care about you, even when you don't feel like you deserve it, or particularly, especially, when you don't feel like you deserve it. That's grace. So I want you to think about a recent moment of personal discouragement or disappointment or failure before God. Maybe you felt horrible because you let God down. And you can feel that emptiness, that distance, where it just seems like God is not there with you. And I want you to imagine in that moment Jesus sitting with you. What would he say to you? How is he telling you, I know you. I know you by name. I see what you've done. I see what you've failed to do, and I continue to find favor with you. I love you. I accept you. I welcome you. I value you. How would that make you feel if you really knew that? How might that lift you out of the discouragement that you have? Now, there's one last wrinkle to this story, a test, if you will. If Moses knows what he really wants and needs from God in the midst of his discouragement and failure. Now, there's a part of the story I didn't read to you as the God of second chances. After this whole ordeal with the people turning away from God through worshiping a golden calf, and he instructs Moses, back in verse 3, which we didn't read, Moses, I want you to go and lead the people to the promised land, because God keeps his promises. But, as a result of Israel's sin, I am not going with you. And it's not cruelty or being a punishing, mean dad, but he basically explains in verse 3, it's better if I don't go with you, because if and when you fail and fall into sin again, I might obliterate you because of how holy I am. So it's better if I don't go. Now, I want you to catch this. Moses hears this. It would be easy to rationalize for Moses and the people of Israel, yeah, you know what? You're right. It's better if you don't come with us. We are indeed a stiff-necked, rebellious people. And we do like to dabble in sexual immorality and idolatry as a group of people. And so the temptation here is to love your failures. What I mean is that what if, with the sins that you like, the sins that make you stumble before God, there was a get-out-of-jail-free card, so you could indulge in it along your journey of life, but without fear of God or the consequences if God doesn't go with you. Loving your failures, loving your sin. But also, there's a temptation to love your success. Well, we messed up, but we still get to go to the promised land? Well, wasn't that the goal all along? Boom, I'll take that. How often we continue to press on in life by our own will and our own strength to accomplish our vision or our goals in life without the presence, protection, and guidance of God going with us. Well, Jesus, if you don't give me the grades or the girl, if you don't give me that project or that promotion, if you don't give me the family and future that I always dreamed of, I'll just do it by myself. I'll live my life, I'll find my own fulfillment. But at the end, you'll experience the emptiness. Because one way or another, you'll ultimately experience the isolation and devastation of life apart from Jesus. And so this moment, what God is saying to him, this is the real test. Moses, what do you really want? And I want you to consider, in the midst of your own failures, what if God were to offer you everything that you want, but in gaining what you want, you'd miss out on what you really need? Now, to Moses, getting to the desired destination, but without God, that is a terrifying prospect. So in verse 15, he begs God, if your presence will not go with me, don't bring us up out from here. In other words, I don't want to move one step forward if you're not coming with me, Lord. Otherwise, in verse 16, if we show up to this promised land without you, then we're no different than any other group of people who are already there. What's the point? It's like going to a honeymoon without your new wife or your new husband. I'm sure it's a nice place, but what's the point? He knows that his joy and his fulfillment isn't ultimately in just receiving the blessing, but in having the blesser. This is the most important thing to Moses. Not reaching his goal, not defeating his enemies, not reaching his new home, not his accomplishments as a leader, not attaining the prize. What's the point of getting everything you want if you don't have Jesus? If you're not coming with us, Lord, I don't want to go. And what's cool here is God doesn't rebuke him. God doesn't say, look, man, I already said to you, I won't go with you. And I already told you to go. I'm giving you what you want, so go. Instead, God is extremely pleased with Moses' desire for him. And in this tremendous display of compassion and favor and acceptance and grace, two times, God reiterates. First in verse 14, my presence will go with you and give you rest. Remember what Pastor Dennis talked about last week? About biblical rest? That God's rest pours out His value, His joy, His intimacy into us through His presence being with us. That's rest. And because Moses didn't hear it the first time, God says it again in verse 17, this very thing that you've asked, for me to come with you, for me to stay close to you, I will do. So, as you and I, as we stumble through the aftermath of our failures, at times we're going to feel disconnected from God. And the temptation then is to find fulfillment in things other than Jesus when we failed. But what we see here is that God offers to continue to go with us when we treasure Him above both our successes, the goals we want to reach, and our failures, the sins that we love. That to remain close with Him when we prize intimacy and relationship and restoration with Him over the alternative allure, over our sins and our missteps and our success. So let me ask you, what do you really want? When you fall down, when you're discouraged by failure and its consequences, we will often turn to other things for fulfillment. But if I decide that my goals are not my treasure, that Jesus is, we might discover that He is willing to go with us and be our intimacy, our joy, our rest, our fulfillment. There was a man I got to talking to, and he was sharing a little bit about his life, Christian guy, and he was in a great company, making a great salary. He had the second thing was he had started a relationship with a woman. He told me, this is the girl that I'm going to marry. And thirdly, he was serving at his church, another church, in the music ministry and the worship ministry. And he felt fully alive that God was using his talents and gifts to honor Him and to bless other people. And so if his life was a graph, you could say that his life was going up and to the right, an upward trajectory. But then he had a weak moment, a moral failing. I don't need to get into the details. And had to step down from his ministry. And as he served less, and he knew that people knew there was a failing behind it, he started to drift away from God. And so to cope with his growing sense of emptiness, that God was just not present in his life, he started to invest more. Well, one of those three threads that were going upwards was taken away from him. So I'm going to invest more and more of my attention and devotion into my girlfriend and into my job. Maybe if I just try harder in these two areas, I just keep pressing on, then I'll be happy, then fulfillment will be in my grasp. And he found himself running on fumes and failure, feeling burnt out and depressed over time. Because that's what happens when you pursue the things that you want without Jesus. So he came to me at that point and asked me, what should I do? I didn't really have any words of wisdom, but what came to mind was I reminded him, I shared with him Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30, when Jesus says to us, to his followers, come to me, all of you who are tired, who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And so I asked him, what do you really want? You felt like you fell down, trying to pick your life back up. God seems like a distant memory. But if you had to pick what was most important to you, being appreciated at your job, being appreciated by your girlfriend, or being close to Jesus? I know, kind of a guilty pastoral question. But when Jesus is our treasure, we begin to see the things of this life at their right size. And we begin to enjoy the things in this life through His eyes. And so there was a moment, as he was thinking about it, he broke down into tears and prayed with me. Jesus, I'm tired of trying to have it all and lose it all again and again and again. I can't keep going on like this with my life apart from you. In other words, I don't want to go another step if it's without you. And so I want to ask you, you're going to fall down, you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to feel that distance from God, that discouragement. And in that moment is the test. What do you really want? Because it's easy to find all kinds of other things to fulfill you or to try to fill up that empty hole where Jesus used to occupy. But when your life is going in the wrong direction, when you're moving away from God, are you tempted to go on ahead and move onwards without Him? Do you know that feeling when you stumble and you feel completely disconnected from Jesus? There's an emptiness when you come to church, when you read your Bible, when you try to pray. It feels like empty words. And you're tempted to fill that hole with something else. And like Moses, we need to remember, what's the point of getting what we want if we miss out on what we really need, if we don't have Jesus? So this morning, how do you need to boldly ask, Jesus, I don't want to move one more step forward if you're not coming with me. Like Moses, what would it look like to say to him, I treasure you above my projects and my progress, above getting a house or getting a spouse or whatever lust or promised land that I think will bring me fulfillment? When you desire Him like that, I think you're going to discover grace. You're going to hear from Him, the very thing that you've asked, I will do. My presence is with you and will go with you even after you've failed. And I'm going to give you true rest and fulfillment by being close to you. I haven't given up on you. I'm pleased with you because of your faith and your desire for me, no matter how many times you stumble. It's not a matter of if, but when you have moments in life where you mess up, when we fail God in our attitudes and our behaviors, our directions and our choices, I bet you can probably picture it right now in your mind. Some disappointment, how I've disappointed God in some way, how I'm not living the way that I should. And it can discourage us and defeat us. And so how are you going to recover from that sense of failure? And you need to hear this morning, because of your relationship with Him, God continues to care for us and give us His unearned favor, His undeserved grace, even in the face of grave mistakes that we've made. And this is not just Moses' story. This is your story, my story too, because the proof is at the cross. Romans chapter 5, verse 8 says that God demonstrates His love for us in this. He sees us while we are at our very worst, as sinners. And yet He gave His very best, His own Son, to die for us. And by giving us this undeserved grace to restore our relationship, our connection, our intimacy with His presence, I want you to hear Him when He says, I know you. I know you by name. I know what you've done. I know what you've failed to do. And yet I continue to accept you and embrace you. And not only do I know you, I am with you, even in the fires of failure. Just treasure me above any of the promises or the goals that you have, or the promised lands that you think will fulfill you. And as my presence goes with you, I will be your joy, your fulfillment, and rest for your soul. Will you bow with me in a word of prayer this morning? God, I don't know where each person stands with you this morning, how people are doing emotionally. Some have come in happy spirits, some have come downcast, like my little boy was. Some of us feel nothing. We feel empty. And whatever state we're in, we know that we stumble and fall. That every single person in this room, happy or sad or empty, has turned our face away from you some way, somehow, today, yesterday, tomorrow. And when we fail and we fail to acknowledge that we fail, our hearts grow cold and you seem far. And so this morning, Lord, would you speak truth and life and grace into our hearts? To know that it's true. Would you help us to picture in our minds whatever areas of failure or whatever lies we've believed about our distance from you, and to believe your word in Romans 8 that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of Christ, from the love of God in Christ Jesus. That when we are in relationship with you by faith in Jesus, that we are forgiven, that we are accepted, that we are loved. And may the God of grace show his undeserved favor to you today. May he wrap your face in his hands and whisper to you, I know you. I know you by name. I know what you've done. And I yet continue to love you and accept you and embrace you, no matter how much you've stumbled, because of my relationship with you through Jesus. And may your people hear you sing that I am with you. No matter what fire you're going through, no matter what fire you've gotten yourself into, that I stand with you today. And may your people treasure Jesus above all else, not willing to go another step without him. And as we do, we find that he is willing, he is present, he is rest for our souls.